So good afternoon and welcome to this overview of digital accessibility. Today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day, so it's particularly appropriate that we've come together to discuss accessibility in the digital world. My name is Mary Ann Blair and I represent Computing Services on the Digital Access Subcommittee of the Universal Access Committee. The Universal Access Committee has been in place for decades. It oversees and facilitates the physical, programmatic, and since 2012, the digital accessibility efforts of the university via the Digital Accessibility Committee. So our committee is an ever-expanding circle of concerned volunteers and subject matter recruits, some of whom could be you at the end of this presentation. And we aim to raise campus awareness, provide information and resources for content providers to make their digital resources accessible for all, and to provide technical consulting to disability resources for accommodation requests. Let me introduce the members of the committee who are here today. Amanda Bernieberg is representing Marketing and Communication. Judy Brooks is representing the Eberly Center. Steve Chabasol is representing Marketing and Communications. Catherine Getchell is representing the Office of Disability Services. Jen Landefeld is representing the School of Computer Science. Dan Munch is here representing the Office of General Counsel. So that gives you a flavor for all of the folks who are volunteering their time to this effort, and there are a number of other members of the committee who are not here today. So here's the plan for today's session. So Dan is going to lead us through the legal background. Then Catherine and Judy are going to introduce you to the Disability Resources Office and Eberly Center resources. I will then come back and talk about some of the university efforts as well as each individual's role in the university. Amanda and Steve are going to cover the university's CMS and the web templates and show us some tools that will help us all identify areas to focus our attention on when we're building web content. Amanda's going to help us understand more about evaluating third parties, because all of our third parties have to also ensure accessibility in the procured services that we get from them. Jen and Catherine are going to introduce us to some techniques for improving the accessibility for common file types and video. And then we'll summarize the day with some key takeaways, saving time for Q&A, although questions are welcome throughout the presentation. You'll notice that we are filming today's presentation. Only the presenters will be shown on film, though your voices may be heard. We have a microphone that we'll ask you to use to ask your questions, so we get those clearly recorded. So let's get started. Before we delve into all of the content that I just mentioned a moment ago, we'd like to welcome Catherine to the podium to help us all get a better understanding of some of the accessibility challenges of navigating the digital landscape. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Mary Ann. Thanks, Mary Ann. Good afternoon, everybody. My name, as Mary Ann said, is Catherine Getchell, and I'm the Director of Disability Resources. And I will be telling you all about the Office of Disability Resources, but what I'd first like to do is actually do a little demo. And this is where I'm actually going to show you what it's like to access a web page using a screen reader. So I want you to imagine. First, I want you to imagine that you have a computer, but someone has unplugged and misplaced your mouse. It's gone. Don't worry, you can still use the computer. Now I want you to imagine that not only is the mouse gone, your screen got turned off. So how would we access the computer? Let's find out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close out the PowerPoint and bring us to where we actually get to take a look from a blind person's point of view how to access a computer using a screen reader, and specifically some web and PDF content. Okay, you're going to hear some talking.
PowerPoints, items view multi-select list box.
Turn that up a little bit. Okay, so that is the JAWS screen reader that you hear talking now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to demo a few things for you. The first thing I'm going to take you to is a website that is, shall we say, not the most accessible. It has a lot of things that we'll be highlighting, like unlabeled links and mysterious buttons, and it's sort of difficult to navigate the website. But we're not going to let you see it just yet. I'm actually just going to bring it up
Windows.
with the screen reader reading the screen for us.
L folder view list
So
view.
we are
L'Oreal
going to
text,
go to
21.
L'Oreal's website.
Internet. L'Oreal.
I'm only picking on L'Oreal because they're a hapless victim. I don't
L'Oreal.
have any stake in L'Oreal or any stake against L'Oreal, but their website proved to be an interesting sort of demo site for this purpose.
Windows F3.
So I'm going to
Find,
turn this
edit,
up a
type
little
in.
bit louder.
PowerPoint. L'Oreal.
Okay, so we're on L'Oreal's website now. And I'm at the top of the page, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my arrow keys to simply read down through the page, read down through the website. And this is what it would be like for a blind person to access a web page.
PowerPoint.
Sorry
JAWS
about that.
L'Oreal.
Here we go.
Address and search use in for list end.
Okay, let me go to the top of the page.
Button.
Button. What's the button for? I don't know. It's not labeled.
Link X.
Link. X. Okay. There's a link that says X. We know it's a link. We know there's a button. We don't really know what either the link or the button do, but we know there's a link and there's a button. Let's see if we can find some content.
By browsing this site, you accept the use of cookies in order to offer you advertising tailored to your interests.
Okay, so by browsing the site, they made sure to make this clear. You accept the use of cookies in order to offer you advertising tailored to your interests. Okay, good to know.
Facilitate the sharing of information on social
This is
net-
more legal mumbo jumbo. Let's keep going.
Click here.
Click here. For what? There's probably something visual, and I will show you the website visually in a moment, but all I can tell you is there's probably something they want me to click right there. Let's keep going with our down arrow key.
Button.
Button. Cool.
Banner.
Banner. Okay, well, I know what a banner is. A banner is sort of a placeholder, sort of prominent area of the website.
List of 3 items.
Now I know I have a list of 3 items. That's good. A list of 3 items, having that label tells me that there are a group of 3 things that the company wants me to sort of see together.
Same page link menu.
There's a menu.
Same page link content.
Content. You're hearing same page link, menu,
Same
content,
page link foot of the page.
foot of the page. So what that tells me is all of these, the menu, the content, and the foot of the page are all on this same page.
List end. Blank.
Now the list end, you hear list end, blank, there's a blank line.
Visited heading level 1 link graphic L'Oreal go to home page.
So here's a heading, it says L'Oreal, go to home page. So what you can see is there's some stuff I can access on this page and some not so much. So let's actually visually take a look and see what this page actually looks like. Bear with us, this will just take a moment to switch over the video. You got it, okay. So the point is that there are some things that can work well or look good visually, but are a problem for someone who's not using a visual interface to access the website. And part of the presentation today is we're going to talk about why that is, and most importantly, what you can do in your content development to fix that problem. Well, what I'd like to do is actually show you a good website, because we've seen what a bad website sounds like, but let's go to a good one. I'm going to be selfish, and I'm going to go to
Favorites.
our Office of Disability Resources website.
Copier. Access. Creating a disability resource. Leaving menus.
And I'm going to show you what makes Disability Resources an accessible, good website.
Blank. Visited heading level 2 link Carnegie Mellon University.
Okay, Carnegie Mellon University. I know right off the top of here we are. And what I can do is on my keyboard here, I can hit H to take me to a heading.
Office of Disability Resources heading level 1.
Heading level 1, Office of Disability Resources. So I know exactly where I am.
Blank. Welcome to the Office of Disability Resources at Carnegie Mellon University. We strive to provide responsive, reasonable accommodations so that Carnegie Mellon students can do their best work. Director. Link Catherine Getchell.
So you'll just have to forgive it for pronouncing my name wrong. I forget it every day.
And the Disability Resources staff are passionate about being vibrant and accessible resources on disability issues for all members of the CMU community. Blank.
So you can tell there's a lot of text here.
Our mission includes
We'll
visited
skip through the mission.
and link with our and sex link with HR for information on blank. Our offices are located on the campus of blank. Map of this
down.
document. Use 2 fingers to move the map.
So here's a map for those folks who might benefit from a map of our campus. Can you all see this okay? So this is what our website looks like. And I'm going to bump us back up to the first heading.
Office of Disability Resources heading.
So this is where, when you're in the CMS, and Judy and Amanda are going to talk about this a little bit more, you can actually, it prompts you to code these types of accessibility features right in, but some of them you're going to have to put in yourself. I can actually then go to a list of all of the links.
Links list dialog. Catherine Getchell.
There's a link for me,
Students.
students,
Visitors.
visitors,
Visit. Terms of use. Plus Catherine. Learn more. Directions. View larger map. Meet the director. Student information and services. Policies and guidelines. Obtaining accommodations. Documentation guidelines.
So you can see how this is very easy to navigate. Everything's labeled. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the different experience of visiting a good website that has all of the links labeled, that is set up where there are headings so it's easy to jump around and navigate things. Because if you think about it, a blind person is not going to be visually scanning a website and looking for that thing that visually jumps out in front of them, because nothing's going to visually jump out in front of them. So they're going to need some other ways to find the most useful content on the website. And headings are one great way to do that. So let me X out of here, and I'm going to now show you a couple of PDF documents. One of these documents is a very inaccessible PDF.
Patient registration form.
So this is a patient registration form that I just found on the internet. I'm not really sure. It's for a medical provider. And there are a couple of key issues that are problematic with this form. And the reason I wanted to highlight a form is because a lot of folks actually design PDF forms. And again, they may look just fine visually, but run into some significant problems. So what if I were a patient and I wanted to fill this out? I would try to go to the first form field to start typing in my information.
Patient's name last, first, MI edit.
Patient's name last, first,
Patient.
middle, okay.
S home phone number edit.
And then it says S home phone number. I don't know what S home phone number is. I think that's maybe my home phone number, but what I'm doing is I'm actually tabbing through, and I think that the order of form fields that I tab through is probably not the same one that you're seeing on the screen. Because in PDF forms, when you're designing them, you actually have to go in manually and set the tab order so that when you're hitting tab, you're migrating through the form just as a sighted person would click the form through the form with their mouse. So let's go to the next field.
Alternate phone number checkbox not checked.
Okay, this is very confusing. Alternate phone number, and then there's a checkbox. I don't think that's actually the correct label for this field, because I don't know why you would have a checkbox by an alternate phone number field. I'm not sure what it actually says, but to me, that's what the labels say.
Seller checkbox not checked.
Cell, again with a checkbox.
Work edit, type in.
And then it says work, and there's an edit field like where I could actually put in a phone number. See, I'm not going to take too long on this, but you can see that this is laid out very strangely and labeled very strangely. So the take-home message with this is when you are designing PDFs, make sure that all of your fields are labeled with the text that you want the person to fill in, name, address, phone number, city, state, etc. And also make sure that the tabbing, when you tab through manually, that it goes from field to field the way you want it to. So I'm going to get out of this.
Alt F4, menu bar, file, the nav is escape.
And the next thing I'm going to do is
Windows
actually
N.
bring up a very accessible
Windows
PDF.
D, A, ADA, F, ADA, animal, ADF, forms and...
And again, I'm going to pick on our own office here.
Legal forms. C, CMU Housing Accommodations Form PDF.
CMU Housing Accommodations Form PDF. I'm going to open that up. This is a new
CMU.
housing form that we designed for folks who need special housing accommodations, like if they need a private bathroom, an air conditioner, or single room, things like that. So with this form, again, I'm going to pretend like I'm going to fill it out.
Section 1, student name edit.
Student name.
Sec-
Okay, so I could type in Joe Schmo.
Schmo. Student Andrew ID edit.
Andrew ID.
Schmo add.
Yeah, that's good
Student
enough.
phone number.
Student phone number, I could put something in there.
Student email edit.
Student
Hyphen X.
email.
Semester S requesting accommodation.
Semesters requesting accommodations. And this is it's actually designed by our intern who's in the audience, Ryan Wave. I like to, sorry, I didn't tell him I was going to recognize him, but this has been designed very specifically to be accessible. And you can see that as I tab through,
Describe the requested accommodations edit.
to describe the requested accommodations. Okay, so I know as I'm tabbing through here, I need to actually describe, I need to type something in, want single room. Okay, cool. So I'm going to actually go ahead and exit out of this. So the point here was just to show you a little bit of a contrast of good forms versus bad. Before I go on, does anybody have any questions about anything that you've seen so far? Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to do, now that you've seen the demo, we're going to talk about some other reasons why this is all so important. I'd like to introduce Dan Munch from the Office of General Counsel, who's going to go through a little bit about the legal background regarding digital accessibility and some of the cases that have come up that have helped guide us in how we develop policies here at CMU. Dan?
Okay, thank you, Catherine. As you can see, I think that was really a good demonstration of sort of the issues that are at play here and what a difference accessibility features can make versus non-accessibility. Now we're going to get into sort of the more legal aspects of this briefly. We'll run through the legal background to all of this. First, we'll talk about what is digital accessibility. In the law, the term accessibility refers to the degree to which a product, device, service, or environment is accessible to individuals with disabilities or other special needs. So most people are familiar with the concept of physical access. So, ramps and door openers or things like that for people who may have mobility impairments. But there are other types of accessibility. There's programmatic access. There's, as I said, physical access, and then there's digital access. And all of them are subject to the same general principles. So digital accessibility concerns the ability of persons with disabilities to access electronic resources such as the internet, software, mobile devices, e-readers, and really any form of information technology. Yep. Okay. So in terms of the general legal background, there are various laws that require Carnegie Mellon and other universities in the country to provide its services in an accessible manner. The two big ones are the Americans with Disability Act, or the ADA, and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Some of the lesser ones that apply to Carnegie Mellon, they're still out there, but they're not as frequently enforced, and that's primarily because the federal laws take precedence, but Pennsylvania has laws as well that require similar things. That's the Pennsylvania Higher Education Opportunity Act and Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. In terms of general obligations, the specific language of the laws varies, but in general, they have the same requirements. And there's really two main requirements. First is that all programs, facilities, and services must be accessible to individuals with disabilities. And this is an affirmative requirement, affirmative responsibility to make these programs accessible or as accessible as we can. But of course, you can't account for every conceivable type of access issue, and sometimes it's just not even reasonable or impossible to anticipate or design around certain limitations. So in cases where our services or our facilities or our computer systems are not accessible as they are, there's an obligation to provide a reasonable accommodation to individuals with disabilities on an as-needed and case-by-case basis. This is the responsive part of the law where we respond to the particular needs of individuals who are having access issues. So here we do have some of the language from the ADA and Rehab Act. As I mentioned, the language it differs, but in general it's the same. This is a quote here from the Rehab Act, which I think really sums up sort of the intent of all the laws. States that no qualified handicapped student shall, on the basis of handicap, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination under any academic, research, occupational training, housing, health insurance, counseling, financial aid, physical education, athletics, recreation, transportation, or other extracurricular or other post-secondary education aids, benefits, or services. So I don't think they lift anything out of that list. and there's some catch-all language in there too. What it's basically saying is we need to make everything about our institution accessible. And if we can't, we need to provide a reasonable accommodation with some exceptions if it would fundamentally alter the nature of an academic program or impose an undue hardship. There are exceptions for that. But in general, we either need to have our services accessible or provide a reasonable accommodation. Various portions of these laws apply to different portions of different industries and different types of entities. So just very briefly, the ADA is broken up into several titles. Title I covers employees and what we are required to do for employees. So this applies to all employers, and Carnegie Mellon is an employer. So we have certain obligations under the ADA to our employees. Title II covers public entities, such as state and local governments, including state schools. So that section doesn't apply to Carnegie Mellon. Title III generally covers what's known as places of public accommodation. And the concept of this is basically places that provide services to the public. Well, Carnegie Mellon certainly provides services to the public. We are providing educational services to the public that anyone who can meet our admissions requirements can receive their services. We also provide public services like a publicly accessible library that anyone can walk in off the street and access. We have publicly accessible internet resources that anyone with an internet connection can access. So we are covered under the ADA as a place of public accommodation. In addition, under the Rehab Act, Carnegie Mellon's covered as a federal contractor because we accept federal contract funds. The Rehab Act also has a section that applies to private institutions that accept federal financial aid, and we certainly accept those funds, so we're also covered under Section 504. Another section I have noted here is Section 508. This section applies to the federal government. As we're going to talk about later in this training, the ADA and the Rehab Act in general, they have this obligation for us to make things accessible, but they don't specify exactly how you go about doing that. Section 508 is a little bit different though, because in Section 508, the government has adopted very specific standards for itself, the standards that it holds itself to in terms of making things accessible. So even though those sort of very precise requirements are not in Section 504 or 503 or the ADA, they are in 508, and we can look to 508 as a guide, even though they're technically not applicable to Carnegie Mellon. In terms of enforcement, there are two entities that enforce this. The first is the U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. They have responsibility for Title II and III of the ADA. In addition, the U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, has enforcement authority for the ADA, Title II, as well as Section 504 of the Rehab Act. What this means is Carnegie Mellon is subject to enforcement by both the Department of Justice and the Office for Civil Rights of the Department of Education. So now I want to run through a few cases that sort of illustrate some of these problems from a legal perspective. Catherine, I think, has already done an excellent job showing the accessibility issues from a personal level, but this will sort of show what kind of institutional problems and institutional exposure exists on the legal compliance end. The first case I want to talk about involves Arizona State. This was a case that came up, I think, back in 2008. It was a complaint filed with the Office of Civil Rights by the National Federation for the Blind and the American Council for the Blind, and it related to the accessibility of e-readers, specifically the Kindle DX. And the allegation was that it was inaccessible to visually impaired students. And what had happened was Arizona State had embarked on a pilot program in several courses to completely replace hard copy textbooks with Kindles. Now, it's important to note that these particular Kindles had some accessibility features. There was screen reader software on the Kindles that would apply to the text of the books and to some of the sort of system navigation things. But those features did not apply to the web browser that was on the Kindle, didn't apply to the thesaurus or the dictionary that was built in, and several of the other features. So the allegation was that because those features were not accessible, that the students who had visual impairments were denied access to these features that other students were not. And even though visually impaired students were given Braille textbooks, the hard copy Braille book, or even just an audio recording of the book, didn't replicate the web browser features or the thesaurus or the dictionary. So they were still deprived of those features. They entered into a settlement agreement with OCR in January 2010. And here's some key language, I think, from the settlement agreement that shows what standard the government is holding people to. According to that settlement agreement, an e-reader is not accessible unless blind individuals may use the device to access and acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services with substantially equivalent ease of use. So really, that sentence, I think, really sums up what the goal is when we're talking about digital access. We're trying to give people with disabilities the same ability to access and acquire information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services with substantially equivalent ease of use. Now, that doesn't mean identical ease of use, but it's substantially equivalent. So it could be that things are a little bit different, but they should be able to do it, again, access that same information, same interactions, same services with substantially equivalent ease of use. Another state I want to talk about involves Penn State. This one was a little bit different. This was another complaint filed with OCR by the National Federation for the Blind. This complaint alleged that various electronic resources at Penn State were inaccessible to individuals with visual impairments. This included course management software, course registration software, its electronic library card catalog, academic department websites, disability services office website. Penn State ended up entering into a settlement agreement where they agreed to make their websites accessible and their software accessible over time. I think there was a sort of phased in where new websites were expected to be accessible when they were launched. Existing websites that were sort of being actively maintained were expected to, become accessible within a year. And then there was like things for legacy websites, which might be only updated on a by request basis. So what the Penn State case really illustrates is that this can be like a global type thing at your institution where a complaint could trigger a review of almost every electronic resource at the institution. And that is what happened at Penn State. Another case, and this one is actually still pending, it's a class action lawsuit that was filed by the National Association for the Deaf against Harvard and MIT. This case alleged that the online courses and other video content provided over the internet as a part of these massively open online courses, that it was inaccessible to individuals with hearing impairments. Now, one of the key issues here was captioning, and whether the captions, whether they were even there at all. In some cases, there were no captions on videos or courses, but in other times, those captions were allegedly inaccurate and unintelligible. So one of the disputes is over the accuracy of captions and what is sufficient to be compliant. So one of the things that Harvard and MIT had been doing was using the automated captioning on YouTube and Google. So this is where instead of a human typing up the captions, a computer program tries to do it based on speech recognition software. Your typical human captioner, if they're good, like a TV quality captioner, is going to be about 95% accurate on the first time through. This software is more in the range of 60 to 70%, and a lot worse if there's things like accents or complicated, unusual terms, particularly scientific terms involved. So the allegation has been that the YouTube automated captions are simply not sufficient at all, and that's still under litigation. What's notable in this case is that the Department of Justice actually intervened in the case and filed a statement of interest in support of the plaintiff's legal theories. So you've got the government coming in on the side of the plaintiffs in that case. Another case involving MOOC courses, this one was in the news lately, you may have heard about it, involved Cal Berkeley. Again, it was another complaint filed with the Office of Civil Rights, and it was about the accessibility of the free content that Berkeley was posting to YouTube and iTunes U. These courses were open to anyone with access to YouTube or iTunes U. And this case has actually been resolved. The settlement came out in late December 2000. I think the settlement was in finding a violation was in August 2016. What happened was that OCR deemed the content inaccessible to a total or partial lack of captions on videos, and this got back to the same issue in the MIT and Harvard case about the accuracy of automated captioning. They found that automatically generated captions were inaccurate and or incomplete, and that content was inaccessible to individuals with visual impairments, and that included inaccessible documents such as things like the PDF that Catherine walked us through, links to other websites that were inaccessible, lack of keyboard access or the ability to navigate by keyboard, and so on. So they were issued an order in August 30, 2016 to comply with the ADA and to conform what's known as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 Level AA. We're going to be talking a lot about those in a few minutes. Those are a set of third-party guidelines published by, I think they're a nonprofit entity, about how to make websites accessible. Now, I mentioned earlier that aside from Section 508, the government doesn't set forth particular requirements or standards for how you go about making something accessible. So what's happened is, when they're resolving these cases, OCR or the Department of Justice, they've often pointed to these third-party guidelines, the WCAG guidelines, as a standard to prove that you're compliant. And in a sense, by incorporating these requirements into settlement agreements over and over and over again, they've sort of made them an unofficial law, because that's the standard that they're holding people to in order to show that you're compliant. Now, what you may have heard about in the news, this got a very big media coverage on things like the Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Ed, was that in March 6th, 2017, due to the cost of complying with the order, Berkeley decided just to remove almost all of this content from iTunes U and YouTube. I think it was over 20,000 educational videos that were removed just because they couldn't afford the cost, or at least and the time, to add captions and fix the other access issues. So they just opted to remove all of that content. Now, they were not ordered to remove that content. They made that decision themselves because they weren't able, in their own opinion, weren't able to meet the requirements of the August order. So what do these cases show in general? This is sort of a list of the common remedies and sanctions from all of these cases. One thing is that they almost always require institutions to revise their policies and procedures to comply, to require that information technology systems be accessible, and they will often cite specifically to WCAG 2.0 Level AA. It's important to sometimes to regularly audit information and electronic information technologies, and often that will be a part of a compliance review by DOJ or DOE. Mandatory training for faculty and staff is something that's been incorporated into many of these settlement agreements. Also, as in the Penn State case, requirements to update websites and systems and make them accessible within set deadlines. And then also requiring institutions to enact procedures to ensure that third-party vendors are compliant with accessibility requirements. So it's not a defense when you say there's an access issue with your course management software. You can't just blame that on the vendor. It's up to the institution to ensure that that's compliant, and ideally, the contract with the vendor should require them to provide an accessible system. So in terms of lessons learned from these cases, it's important that education technology and course materials be accessible to individuals with disabilities. Again, to reiterate that sentence from the Arizona State case, it's important to have access to the same information, services, and interactions, accessible in a substantially equivalent ease of use, accessible at the same time as other students. So you can't, if there's an access issue with, say, a video for a course, you can't let the students who don't have, say, a visual or hearing impairment to proceed with that coursework while the student with a disability falls behind. If you have inaccessible content, that should not be deployed at all to a class if there's a student who has an access issue, and you should wait until you have accessible versions available at the same time. Also, these rules apply to new and emerging technology. Just because something is new, and if you look back at the Arizona State case in 2008, the Kindle was new technology. You're not off the hook for accessibility compliance. If we're going to take a step forward on technology and pioneer new educational tools, we should make sure that we're taking everyone with us when we take that step forward and not leaving certain people behind because of access issues. Excuse me. So another point is that it's important that faculty, staff, and administrators be educated about digital access issues. That's one of the reasons we do trainings like this, and we do other sessions periodically throughout the year for other groups on campus. Another point is that it's important that the Office of Disability Resources be the main point of contact for resolving student access issues, just as they would with any other accommodation issue or issue related to a disability. Just because it's digital doesn't mean that you shouldn't involve the Office of Disability Resources. And instructors and departments should not attempt to resolve access issues on their own. And finally, it's clear from all the enforcement action by DOJ and DOE that WCAG has become the model for ADA compliance on the internet and other electronic systems. And in fact, I mentioned that Section 508 codifies the specific requirements for the federal government to follow when they're doing their own information technology systems. Last summer, Section 508 was updated for the first time in many years, and they more or less cut and pasted WCAG and put it into Section 508 as the standard. So that has been codified within Section 508 officially. Dan, did you have a question?
So Dan, on that Arizona case, so was Kindle sued because the product was going to be used for educational purposes, or was that just the Kindle product itself needed to be accessible if it's just somebody who bought it just to read for pastime? How was that?
So that particular complaint was with OCR, and it was limited to Arizona State's use of the Kindle.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, sorry. So the question is, in the Arizona State case, whether that was a case involving the Kindle DX, whether that was a case generally about the Kindle sort of on a national product level, or whether it was specific to the educational uses at Arizona State. That case was specific to the educational uses at Arizona State, but the same principle applied or could have applied to the product in general. And since then, I should say, in Amazon's defense, they've made many improvements. I mean, that was back in 2010 when that settlement agreement came out. There have been many improvements to the Kindle and similar devices on the accessibility front. I think today it would be okay to use that type of device. It hasn't been tested before OCR again, but there have been major changes on the accessibility front. But it's just sort of an example of how this applies to new and emerging technology. So this slide here just lists some of the recent cases that are closed and pending. I'm not going to talk about any more of them, but just sort of want to illustrate the volume of cases and some of the high profile of the institutions that have been sued or subjected to OCR complaints over this. A lot of our peer institutions are on this list. A lot of Ivy League institutions are on this list. So this is definitely a hot issue in higher education law. And then I think beyond the law, perhaps the most important thing is that this is the right thing to do. Making things accessible and providing for digital access, it fits in with several of the core elements of our strategic plan. We have a commitment to diversity and inclusion, and that includes accessibility. So part of our strategic plan is to develop and implement tools and programs to optimize practices in diversity and inclusion throughout the university community. And certainly digital access should be a part of that. In addition, we have a policy, the Carnegie Mellon Statement of Assurance is basically the non-discrimination policy for the university. It states the Carnegie Mellon University does not discriminate in the admission, employment, or the administration of its programs or activities on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, handicap, or disability, and many other categories listed there. The point is that we have a commitment to non-discrimination on this basis, and that includes in the administration of our programs. We've made a commitment to be inclusive to individuals with disabilities. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit more about the university resources and specifically the Office of Disability Resources, and I will turn things back over to Catherine.
All right, thanks, Dan. To bring us to talk a little bit about the Office of Disability Resources and the services that we provide. But before I do that, I just want to kind of broaden our thinking about accessibility for a second. So all through this presentation, we've been talking about accessibility for individuals with disabilities. But if you think about it, accessibility is really a universal term that applies to everyone. For example, let's say that you're in a brand new kitchen and you're a little bit on the shorter side. Maybe you're, 5 feet tall or so, and there's a cabinet that's 7.5 feet in the air. Are you going to be able to reach that? It's not accessible for you. You don't have a disability, but because of your height, that cabinet's not going to work for you. Now, for somebody that's 6'5", that's going to work just fine for them. The reason I mention this is that I want you to think about accessibility as something that really applies to everyone. So something that, chances are, something that's designed well for people with disabilities is actually going to be easier for everyone to use. Okay, there's my soapbox. Now let's talk about disability resources a little bit. So as Dan has been talking about, we make great efforts here at CMU to provide digital, physical, and programmatic access for everyone. And that's why I stress access to everyone. So what's disability resources? What is our role there? We provide accommodations and services that are striving to help make sure that we are an inclusive community. And so we can assist if there is a digital, physical, or programmatic access issue to any type of event or information, course, etc. So to give you an overview of the kinds of accommodations that we may provide, they may be physical access. For example, a student in a wheelchair needs to access a certain part of a building. Most of our buildings are accessible, but there's just a couple here and there that may present some accessibility issues. So we work with the registrar, for example, to make sure that that person is going to be able to, that the classes for that person are such that they can get to all of their classes. If there's an inaccessible building entrance, that gets repaired and fixed, and we coordinate all of that kind of thing. Programmatically, everything from providing someone with some flexibility, maybe for assignments or attendance if they perhaps have a chronic health issue. They may need extra time on testing. Maybe they have a learning disability or ADHD, something like that. Access to information. We have a couple of students who are hard of hearing, and we make sure that all of their classes are closed captioned. So they don't use American Sign Language, but they have all of their what's spoken by the professor or the other students captioned in the class. We make sure that activities and events are accessible. If someone's traveling out off of campus to an event that maybe they need accessible transportation to that event, we would coordinate that. Again, digital access, like we've been showing you, making sure that all of the course content is accessible to everyone. We also work with emergency waiting areas for individuals who may need assistance evacuating a building, who have mobility impairments. There's a lot of different kinds of services that we provide and coordinate, and these would all be really on a case-by-case basis. So accommodations, we provide accommodations for students and visitors here at Office of Disability Resources. Faculty and staff actually are through the Office of Human Resources, Equal Opportunity Services. So they would be contacting the Equal Opportunity Services Division, faculty and staff, if they have accommodation needs or disability needs. Students and visitors are going to go ahead and contact us. What I'd like to do now is just give you a very quick overview of the accommodation process that students go through when they are interested in receiving accommodations. First of all, they're responsible for reaching out to disability resources to secure accommodations. So that's called self-identifying. They're responsible for self-identifying that they have a disability. For example, if someone's using a wheelchair and traveling around campus, we're not going to send out the posse to say, hey, you have a disability. You need to get into our office and get accommodations. We rely on our students to come to us and say, I have a disability and I need some assistance. And accommodations are provided on a very individualized case-by-case basis. I spend about an hour with a student when I meet with them to figure out just what they might need, go over their documentation, if there's documentation they've provided, recommendations that might be in there, and really talk to the student specifically about their accommodation needs so that, for example, we don't say, well, if you have a learning disability, you automatically get A, B, and C accommodations, and if you have a hearing impairment, you automatically get X, Y, and Z accommodations, because everybody's disability is different and everybody's needs are a little bit different. So again, to talk through the accommodation process a bit more, they meet with us here, they're at Disability Resources, and we do an intake, and they will be providing us with documentation of their disability, their functional limitations. We also ask for sometimes a treatment history, a little bit more information, and if the provider of the documentation has some recommendations for specific accommodations, we take those very seriously as well, because they may know the person a lot better than we do. What we do is we create an individualized accommodation plan that's based on the documentation. It's based on the understanding that we've developed of the student's needs. And if digital access issues arise, for example, I have coming in the fall a visually impaired student that I'm going to be meeting with tomorrow to talk with him about what digital access issues he may have with accessing course materials. The student then will take a summary page of their accommodation plan. They'll meet with their faculty to go over what those accommodations are. We stress to the students that it's really important that they take on the initiative of meeting with the faculty member. We're not going to out them. We're not going to go to all their faculty and say, oh, Joe student has a disability, better watch out. They need to decide which faculty and which classes they would like accommodations for. Because, for example, they may have a learning disability in math, and they may only need accommodations for math classes, and they may choose that for their English and physics classes and whatever, they're not going to disclose their disability, and that's okay. That's part of their right as a student here to disclose to when and whom is important to them, and they just will be getting accommodations for those classes that they disclose. We encourage them to notify their faculty as early in the semester as possible, but sometimes, depending on different situations and issues, it may be a little bit later on in the semester, sometimes before they do that. So here's our contact information. And what I'd like to do next is actually take you to a couple of screenshots of a pretty cool page on the Disability Resources website, and that's the digital accessibility page. A couple images here. When you go to our website, right on the home in Student Information Services, you'll find the digital accessibility page, and this gives you a ton of resources for making your materials accessible. It's kind of a great place to start in terms of getting some accessibility tools going. And here's another shot of the website. One of the things that I wanted to highlight here, there's a lot of great links on the website, including the Wave tool, which Steve is going to demo a little bit later, that allows you to actually go in and test a website to see if it's accessible. There's also a 30 tips document here on this website, which is a really nice thing to kind of print out or have handy when you're developing forms, or even forms, websites, documents, anything that you might be developing that would be digital content, because it'll help you take a quick look and make sure that you've done everything you need to do to make a particular type of document accessible. So the next thing I'd like to do is introduce Judy Brooks, who's going to tell you a little bit about the Eberly Center and the great resources that they have when it comes to digital accessibility, because they really team up with us on a lot of our issues and working with faculty to make sure that the course content is accessible. Judy?
Hi, everybody. Oops. I did the wrong thing. Okay. So the Eberly Center is here to support faculty and graduate students in their teaching. And we distill the research on learning to make that available to them, to incorporate into their courses and to support their students' learning. And we also try to, build the community and so that they can innovate in their teaching and create new modes of learning for their students. And we do this through a number of programs that we provide. For example, Teaching as Research is a 3-day program that we provide to faculty. We hold incoming faculty orientation, where we do an orientation also on digital accessibility, or accessibility more generally, and just a number of other programs that we run for them. So with that, when they are designing, we can work with them one-on-one, and making learning accessible is, the universal method of design. And so what that means is so, for example, there's the multi-representation of information that is actually helpful for students to learn. And so that is very much synergistic with what we want to do from an accessibility standpoint anyway. With respect to, for example, our instructional video service, we take the research on multimedia for learning and we bring that together with making it accessible, and the workflow and the process for incorporating that and creating that particular learning asset is integrated. So the pedagogical rationale behind it, what makes it accessible digitally, is all brought through a workflow that we support the faculty in doing, or graduate student, whoever's making that artifact. So we provide them with a number of services that incorporate the accessibility component. And also we support providing that language inside of the syllabus. So when faculty are using educational technologies, they come to us for a number of reasons. One is I have a tool and I want to use it. So then we'll go through a vetting process, and part of that vetting process is digital accessibility and FERPA compliance. Is it pedagogically sound? Do we already support it, something like it centrally? So we go through this matching process. What are your teaching goals? What is it? How is it supporting learning? And recently, we have a beautiful tool that is wonderfully vetted through pedagogical lens. It is great for creating groups and supporting group work. However, we wouldn't have known this, but recently faculty reached out to us to ask us, hey, they started to charge for this. Can you support it from a central support service? And so we went through our vetting process and found that it is neither digitally accessible or FERPA compliant. So we're continuing to work through that process because we do think it's a valuable tool, but we need the end provider to actually make that resource accessible before we can actually support it centrally. So that's one particular way. And another way is then, of course, incorporating the technology into their teaching. So we support Canvas. Canvas is vetted from a FERPA compliance and digital accessibility perspective. However, as others have said, there's still the content that you put inside of Canvas. And so that is, whatever your PDFs are and things like that. We help you to work through that process. We have a number of folks on the team. They can actually get you through like a model of that, and then you can take it on your own. And then also we connect you with the other services through Catherine's office, et cetera. So as you're coming in for that teaching consultation support, we're taking you through that full range of services. Keep forgetting. And I think that's it. Mary Ann will talk to you about the university.
So Dan led us through some of the lessons learned from the legal cases, and one of the things our committee did then was map those lessons learned to initiatives within the university. So one of the things that we learned is you should have a single or a limited point of contact and assigned responsibility for digital accessibility and for accessibility needs in general. Everett Tatamy is responsible for faculty and staff through that equal opportunity services, and then Catherine Getchell, as she's already mentioned, is responsible for students. If you take no other message away from today, it is if you are approached by anyone with an accessibility or accommodation need, you need to weave in the appropriate office into that conversation. Some of the legal cases that we've seen, some of the problems have been because they did not weave the trained and the expert resources into handling the problem. Policies and procedures are very important, and so we feel that we've got some policies that cover the accessibility area, but we're also working on some guidelines, specifically in digital technology. If anyone wants a copy of the draft of those guidelines, we'd be very happy for some additional feedback on those guidelines, but specifically, we are recommending, and on the webpage that Catherine demoed, that we adopt what others have adopted, which are the WCAG 2.0 level AA. Some of the schools have been required to go through an accessibility audit, which is looking at their whole digital landscape and identifying where there are gaps in accessibility. This is something that we have not undertaken at CMU. For those of you who are building websites, we have a recommended accessibility statement that should appear in a footer or some other standard place on your website. And this is also on the university's main web pages, so you can grab it there if you need it. As Dan mentioned, some of the schools have been required to deliver annual training and awareness on digital access to all faculty, staff, and students. And so these presentations are things that we're using to help us address this training and awareness need. Stay tuned and check out Focus U. And if you want email, when Professional Development Services comes up with their additional hands-on training classes in terms of how to make very specific kinds of things digitally accessible, let us know. We can put you on the list for those classes. So new classes are being developed even as we speak. The other is to extend the digital accessibility requirements on the procurement front, and we work with Matt D'Amelio and others to develop some contract boilerplate. So when Matt gets a contract request for a service, in addition to things like the FERPA language or security language, we've developed boilerplate that should go into contracts. So if you're looking at a contract and it doesn't have this language, and you know that it is about delivering some kind of software, or maybe it's web consulting services, other kinds of things, we need to make sure that this clause is addressed, and we attempt to get it into our procurement. Computing services, when it participates in evaluations of software or software as a service providers, we have a standard questionnaire that we use to help guide folks through all the evaluation criteria, and that includes digital accessibility. We also request that a software provider or a service provider provide a voluntary statement product accessibility template, which is sort of the government's attempt to access all of this information in its procurement cycle. So we've adopted this form. Folks generally fill it out once and then use it for anybody who's buying their service. So when folks aren't aware of this requirement, we help spread the news among vendors that this is something that they should be addressing if this has not come to their attention. But you also have a role. So how many people build buildings on campus? Install a sidewalk? Elevators? No. How many people build websites? Create PDF documents, create Word documents, buy software or hardware. Okay, so this kind of shows that on one hand, we've got a very centralized service handling the physical accessibility needs of the campus, and then we have a very distributed environment that's handling the digital access. So our role in this all is that anything that we create, we need to think about digital access and bake it in from the beginning. It's always easier to bake it in than bolt it on afterwards. So, what can you do? I mean, obviously realize this is a team effort, and we're going to lead you through some things to think about in terms of prioritizing your efforts, and also making use of those enabling technologies Amanda and Steve are going to talk about in a moment. Again, design for accessibility from the outset, help us spread the word, and certainly give us feedback on what you need in terms of resources and the message that we're delivering. So top enablers and hotspots. So this is how we help in areas that we need to pay particular attention. Video we need to pay particular attention to. If you're posting a video, it needs to be captioned. When you put it out there, it needs to be, there needs to be a transcript for it at the time you post it. That was the message in the Berkeley case. And Jen and Catherine are going to talk a little bit more about how you do that later. The content management system has the ability to let us know about where we need to put tags, but the problem is we need to fill in the fields. The templates have the information, but when you're putting an image on your website, you need to describe the image in the alternate text tab. That's something that you need to do, although these tools can help you know that you need to do it. Same goes on the learning management side. This all applies to all the digital resources you use in courses and in classrooms. And think about things like anything reaching out into the public domain, so applicants for educational positions, but also just for employment positions. Those kinds of applications need to be dealt with because they're being presented to a large community. So where should you prioritize your efforts? Certainly anytime Catherine or Everett on the faculty and staff side come to you, right, with an accommodation request, that's obviously a priority number one. It is addressing a need that has been identified and has been requested. But then beyond that, think about digital access for anything that is new or upcoming. Address it into contracts from the outset. And then as you upgrade your systems, think about introducing the accessibility pieces at that point. And as Dan mentioned, some of the settlements have meant that legacy systems you address when you get a particular requirement for. In terms of what kind of content, obviously classroom content. It is the business of the university and it needs to be accessible. And then other things for students are a high priority, and anything reaching out into the public, as in the case of prospects or applicants for Carnegie Mellon employment. Okay, at this point we're going to talk about one of our key enablers, the CMS, and I invite Amanda and Steve to have this conversation.
Thanks, Marianne. Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Berneyberg. Like they mentioned, I work in the university's marketing and communications division. How many of you, does anybody in here use the CMS, the university CMS? Okay, anybody thinking about it? All right, great. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, how we use the CMS and specifically about accessibility. I love how Catherine mentioned that a lot of times accessibility has a lot to do with good design and good kind of web best practices in general. I think that's really true. Like when you think about how you're labeling items on your website or how you're talking about links on your website, it's really not just good for accessibility, it's just good. So I have an example here. The university's CMS actually forces you to use alternate text on images. So then again, it comes back to us as owners and site managers to fill in the proper descriptive words. So rather than just saying CMU when there's a picture of the CMU word mark, to be descriptive about what exactly it is. So, that's one of the benefits of the CMS, is that it kind of forces you to think through some of those questions. There we go. Another thing I wanted to talk about is our templates. So Steve's going to get up in a minute and talk. Steve did a lot of testing on our university templates, and what I mean by templates is the design that you see. So he did a lot of testing on our colors. As far as accessibility goes, you need to make sure that things aren't too light or too dark, and that they're readable. If folks have problems, identifying words on top of color. So he did a lot of that testing for us. So that's kind of already built into the CMS, and something that we can easily pick up and use rather than having to choose your own colors and do those same kind of tests. And now I think, Steve, you're going to come up and talk about some of the tools that we use. Great.
Hello, thank you, Amanda. I'm Steve, and I want to go back to Amanda's first slide here. No, I'll have to use the clicker. Got it. Okay, so if you notice over here next to the word mark, it says style guides, and every style guide is a heading, and underneath each of those headings is labeled brand.pdf, web.pdf, writing.pdf. So it's describing, the links are actually describing what is behind the link. So like when Catherine was up here and the link said click here, that doesn't tell you anything about what the link goes to. Okay, so there's a tool out there called the Wave tool. Who has heard of this before? Okay, so it will evaluate any website and tell you how accessible it is. And it's pretty easy to use. You just have to know what to look for. So we're going to look at that now. Now here's the L'Oreal website, which we visited earlier. And it's pretty interesting to see how ugly it looks when run through this tool. And I'm going to click this guy here. So here's the L'Oreal website. And you can see on the left there's a little summary. And it shows that there's 54 errors and 47 alerts. And if you want to look at the website without any styles on it as plain text, you can do that. Sometimes it's easier to look at your website without any style. If you look at the little flag, it shows you the errors. There's missing alternative text on an image. 13 linked images that are missing alternative text. So that's like the X. Like when she was tabbing through and it said, link X. What's that? I don't know. Empty links. That could have also been one of the X's. 40 empty links. Then there's alerts. So one suspicious alternative text. One unlabeled form element. That was button. So you just want to make sure, 3 possible headings. So those are places where maybe you bolded something and meant for it to be a heading, but instead of being a heading, it's just bolded, which is not a heading. So it tells you all kind of stuff about your website. And you can go over to the contrast tab, and it'll tell you where there are contrast errors, where there's low contrast. And I think it's giving me errors here because there's hidden items. Items that were hidden from visual users that are not meant to be looked at. But this website does pretty good with contrast, actually. So I'm going to go back to PowerPoint here. Oops, this guy. All right. So there's a few gotchas about the Wave tool, though, and this is kind of getting into nerd territory here. So it can't process colors with an alpha channel. If you've ever used Photoshop and turned down the opacity on a layer, that's an alpha channel. So when you have two things that have an alpha channel on top of each other, the wave tool doesn't know how to process those colors. So you have to manually get the hexadecimal values and check them manually at the color checker. There's a link down here at the bottom of the screen. And then another gotcha, the CMS templates, so we did all the work for you. If you use the templates, all of the color and contrast and stuff like that is taken care of. But an early version of the new templates, linked text wasn't underlined, it was just red. And I was in a meeting with a coworker and I said, could you click that link? And he was like looking around the page and like scrolling through and he's like, this one? I'm like, no, the one that says tour the 143 acre urban campus, that link. And he didn't know it was a link. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm colorblind. I couldn't see what that link is. And I said, this is awesome. Like you're helping me make the website better. So the next version we released, we underlined all the links because if you look at the second line down, when you turn off the colors, you can't tell it's the difference between the red and the gray. The shade is almost the same. And there's some nerdy things on the side if you want to go look at your colors yourself to see how they look. You can do it in Photoshop. You can do it with CSS if you like to code things. And there's a website where you can just paste in an image and it shows you the black and white version and also the different types of color blindness and how that affects your website or software. And one final thing, with videos, you might want to run it through some kind of checker or just be careful because sometimes videos can cause seizures. So if you have things that are very contrasty, jumping back and forth with lots of transitions, this is really rare, but it's something to look out for. I don't really have any modern tools to check for this kind of stuff. The only one I know of only runs on Windows 7 and Windows XP. So if you know of a newer one or ever hear about some sort of video seizure checking software, please send me an email because I want to know about it. And I am done. Thank you. Amanda? Amanda's back.
Just a note about using and evaluating third-party providers. I know lots of us at Carnegie Mellon, when we feel like, oh, we definitely can't do everything ourselves, we need to hire X agency or X person to help us create something. This is just a note, that we need to be holding our vendors and ourselves accountable for making sure that they live up to what they said they were going to. So the good news is that our contracts office knows a lot about this, and so they oftentimes, if there's nothing in the contract, will add something to say, if this is like a website or something like that, they will add language to that effect. But then it's really up to us to talk with the vendor about that. So, as you're sitting down and having some of those first conversations, to say to them, this is really important for the university. This is something that we will be checking for, and then follow through and actually check for that using some of these tools that we talked about today, just so that they're aware that it's important and that it's not just kind of a small print thing that they can, not live up to. This is an interesting point here, the VPAT. It's something that I've just learned about recently, thanks to Catherine. Thank you, Catherine. Basically, vendors can put together this accessibility form where they say, here's what we think is accessible about our product. Hopefully they're as transparent as possible. So that gives you kind of a good step in the right direction of, are they gonna be meeting some of the needs that we have? So that's one thing that you can ask them for. Next up, we are going to look at improving accessibility for common file types with Jen.
There we go. So we've talked a lot about web, and we often know what we should be doing there. There's lots out on the internet that you can get for guidance. You can go find things by Googling stuff when you need to figure out what you need to add to your page. What a lot of people skip is what they need to do with their documents.
Catherine gave us a really good example of what happens with a PDF, but we all do other documents all the time, and we need to distribute those. And sometimes we're not sure if those are being distributed to classes as well. Sometimes we're very sure they're being distributed to classes, but we don't know if there's anybody who's going to need accommodation in that class because we aren't told. So very much along the lines of what you need to be concerned with on your web pages, you need to be concerned with in your documents. Do you have headers? Do you have sections? Do you have tables? Do you have images? Because we can put images in just about everything that we distribute now. So you want to make sure that you have all of those things covered the same way you would when you're doing them with your HTML. We have a lot of links in here for you. My next page is almost all links. So we will be sending you the slides afterwards so that you can have all of these accessible and be able to make use of them as you're looking for your, the things that you're working on. We were talking about content management systems, the learning management systems, and what they provide as a product. That secondary piece is, again, you're going to be distributing documents, you're going to be providing information through those systems. Some of those systems actually have information for you and can link you to things that will give you additional tools to make sure that you have all of your documents in compliant formats. A lot of the vendors also provide this for their products, and you can find those generally if you just do an accessibility search on a specific product, you will come up with a page that they've provided as well. I had to double check my links because we know things are disappearing bit by bit, but the government links here do still work for things that have been posted by segments of our government in support of this. On the table, you've probably been wondering what the papers were up here. I provided some checklists. There are different file formats that the government has provided checklists in association with the 508 and some other things that are available to you. They are for versions of software that you may not be using because the government isn't always on the latest version of things and things aren't always vetted up to the latest version. This is where you want to kind of pick and choose. You may want to do something where you're at the vendor site for things that they have updated in their own products. But these are good basic checklists that you're welcome to take with you. There are for PowerPoint, for Acrobat, for Word, and for Excel. So the basics that we deal with on a regular basis. The other piece that we talked about was video capture. Captioning needs to happen, ideally, right when you're doing the actual video capture. A lot of the problems that we've found with the lawsuits that have occurred and the Berkeley decision for taking down over 20,000 videos was that to go back and caption those things can be very expensive. There are ways that you can do this on your own. There are tools that are provided that you can get through connecting with the Eberly Center. That can also be through some of our other resources on campus. Pardon me. And the two pieces that you want are to have the captioning and the transcript so that you have both of those pieces for people who need either or. One of the things that you want to be careful of is if you end up doing your own. And this is something that you can do. We don't want people to not provide information immediately. What you want to build into your process is if you're going to make use of the auto captioning from something like YouTube, you want to make sure that you have someone physically checking that transcript. You need to have it posted to your own channel where you can log in, you have the access, and you can look at what it's done and correct it before you provide it. So when a faculty member is thinking about doing this, we need to educate them that yes, they can do this, but before they post it, if they're doing it for perhaps course review for the students, not live in the course, they need to have somebody prepared to do that checking to make sure that it's accurate before they provide it for the class. So they need to be able to be aware of that built-in time they need for doing that editing. I'll leave it to Mary Ann for our takeaway.
Before I forget, Catherine found for me the upcoming course. Now, this will be drilling into particular file types, and it's offered on June 15th from Professional Development Services. So if you're not already enrolled in that and you're interested, please do that. Okay, so what are our key takeaways when procuring anything new? Work with the contracts office to make sure that the product contract is accessible, but you'll want to do your own evaluation and look at those VPATs, which will help us all learn what the features are as well as you look at that document. Certainly when updating or writing anything new for the web, comply with those guidelines. There's a long list of them, but some of them will not apply to you. So, don't try to boil the ocean. There are some very key things that you'll just sort of want to start building into your process. And get assistance from the resources that exist. Check out those websites and work with each other. We could use some expertise too on the team. If you're developing and learning and have things to contribute back, please join us. And again, that one key thing to think about is to refer folks to the Disability Resources Office or Equal Opportunity Services. And with that, I think we'd like to take any questions that you might have. We have a microphone to circulate. Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming. Really appreciate your attendance today.